Hey there, and welcome. Today, we're going to break down some of the biggest, most important ideas in any democracy, your fundamental rights. Seriously, these are the principles that shape our entire society, so getting a handle on them is absolutely key. Okay, let's dive right in.
So, let's just start with a really big question. Have you ever actually stopped to think about what rights you have? Not because some law granted them to you, but just because you're you, just for being human.
Well, that brings us to this incredible concept, natural rights. These are the basic entitlements that every single one of us has, just by existing. And here's the most important part. They are not a gift from any government. In fact, it's the other way around. The government's whole job is to protect these rights that you already have.
All right, so let's start exploring what these inherent, built-in rights actually look like.
You can really think of these rights as the foundation, the actual building blocks of a free and fair society. They define that crucial relationship between you, the individual, and the state. Understanding them is a game changer for any citizen. Now, I know this can sound like a huge, messy topic, but the good news is we can actually organize these rights into a pretty clear framework. So let's try to map them out. So check this out. Think of this as our blue point for today's discussion. It takes all these big ideas about human rights and breaks them down into smaller, connected pieces. It's basically our map for navigating this whole world. And at the very top of that map, you have these 6 core natural rights. You've got the right to dignity, life and security, due process, liberty, equality, and property. Each one is a massive pillar holding up the whole structure of democracy. For this explainer, we're going to zero in on a couple of the most complex and, honestly, some of the most important rights. Let's kick things off with a huge one, the right to liberty. So what even is liberty? Well, at its very core, it's your right to choose. It's the freedom to decide, to act, or even not to act, based on your own free will, not because someone is forcing you. It's really the freedom to be the author of your own life. But liberty isn't just one single thing. It's this giant umbrella, and underneath it, you've got all these specific freedoms that touch our lives every single day. Things like the freedom to think whatever you want, to say what you believe, to choose your own career, to travel, and to practice any religion, or none at all. And let's just zoom in on that last one for a second, freedom of religion. This is a perfect example of how nuanced these rights are. See, it's not just one idea. It's the freedom of religion, your right to hold any faith and practice it. But, and this is just as important, it's also the freedom from religion, your right to hold no faith at all and to not be forced into any religious practice. It's designed to protect everybody. Okay, let's switch gears and tackle another incredibly important and, let's be honest, often misunderstood right, the right to equality. Now, on the surface, the principle of equality sounds pretty straightforward, right? Everybody is born with the same rights, and we should all be treated that way. No one should face discrimination because of who they are, their background, their identity, any of it. Simple enough, you'd think, but this is where things get really tricky. Is treating people differently always a violation of equality? Is it always wrong? Let's dig into that. This table right here is absolutely key to understanding the whole thing. It breaks down the 3 main ways we look at unequal treatment. On one end, you've got discrimination, which is unequal treatment for an irrelevant, unjust reason. In the middle, there's distinction, which is unequal treatment for a justified reason. And then there's affirmative action. That's temporary unequal treatment meant to fix a past injustice. The real difference between them, it all comes down to the justification. So let's start with the one we can all agree is just flat out wrong: prohibited discrimination. This is when someone is treated differently for a reason that has absolutely nothing to do with the situation, like their race, their gender, or where they come from. This is a clear-cut violation of the right to equality. But then, on the other hand, you have something called permissible distinction. This is when the unequal treatment is actually based on a relevant difference. The classic example is a firefighter having to pass a different, tougher physical fitness test than, say, an office worker. It makes sense, right? The unequal treatment is justified by the actual demands of the job. And that brings us to our third category, affirmative action. This is when a policy temporarily gives some kind of preference or benefit to a group that has been historically disadvantaged. The goal here isn't to create permanent inequality, it's the opposite. The goal is to level the playing field and help close those societal gaps created by past discrimination. Okay, we've covered some pretty big theories. But what does any of this look like when the rubber meets the road?
Let's check out a real-world case where these rights were really put to the test.
So get this. Here's the situation. A staff member at a high school writes this internal email, and it's filled with just awful, insulting comments and descriptions of different students. Then, by complete accident, that email gets sent to one of the students.
As you can probably imagine, the students were furious. They organized protests, taking these private, offensive comments and making them very, very public.
So, what's the fundamental right being violated here? It's the right to dignity. This right is all about protecting our basic human worth, our good name, and our right not to be subjected to humiliating or degrading treatment. The coordinator's email was a direct attack on that dignity.
You know, the right to dignity isn't just about protecting people from insults. It also protects our privacy. There was another case where the Ministry of Transport agreed not to print a person's name on their disability parking permit. Why? To protect their privacy and dignity from unwanted attention. It's another great example of this right in action.
We've seen just how essential these rights are. But all of this leaves us with one last massive question. What happens when two fundamental rights clash? What happens when one person's right to liberty, like their freedom of speech, runs headfirst into another person's right to dignity? When two of these core rights are in conflict, which one wins? Well, that is one of the toughest challenges for any democracy, and it often forces judges and lawmakers to perform this incredibly delicate balancing act, trying to figure out which right carries more weight in that specific, messy, real-world situation.